Thanks so much for joining us today. I have to ask you, you've picked a heck of a year to join leadership. How is your first session in leadership going?
Well, it's entertaining.
I bet it is.
We've had some fun. We've had some big issues come through. It was some hard work to get here, but I'm glad we're here. I think that the four of us over on House Leadership are working really well as a team, and it's fun to be a part of that team.
So including you have 56 people in your caucus.
Yes.
That's a lot of cats to herd.
Yeah, welcome to the supermajority. Yes.
That's right. So how are those dynamics? Are there any surprises now that you're the person who's trying to corral that discussion?
I think the former caucus chairman, who didn't run for the position again, the position was open, his personality and mine are much different. I think the caucus for my first 2 years was much more, the leadership was much more laid back. And when I decided I was going to run, I'm very much a planner, very much an organizer, and so my promise to members of the caucus, we put together a media plan, put together some very specific benchmarks and things that we wanted to change about how the caucus operated. And so we spent a lot of time doing that beyond the little things that seem to come up during session.
I mean, from the media perspective, we certainly see an increase in communications and press releases and statements and everything
Perfect.
like that. But exactly as you planned, I imagine.
Glad to hear it.
But internally, how is it going with the changes you said that you've implemented in, as far as how caucus meetings are run?
How caucus meetings are run? Well, I think that I have a bit of a different philosophy in that I like to keep things really tight and agenda'd, and not to discourage conversation, but to just make sure that people keep on a path, because I'm sure you know from meetings you've attended, anytime you get over 50 in a room in particular, if you go down a rabbit hole, it can last you an hour or 2 hours. And so I think we've adjusted the way that the meetings are run, so it's with a little different style, and we've been really good. Our meetings have been really targeted, and we tend to be a little bit shorter, and so far so good, I think.
You're also the only woman in majority leadership in either the House or the Senate, and this is in a year that in both bodies we see fewer women chairmen because so many of last year's chairwomen retired or lost their primaries. What's that dynamic like?
Well, and that has been an interesting situation, and it wasn't any effort to have fewer women involved in leadership. It was just kind of a strange situation where we had a third of our members turn over, and a lot of new members are women, and that's great, and some of them are my friends and have been for years, so of course I was excited to see them. But then when you go to look for the chairman positions, you definitely want someone who's been around for a little bit, and so that kind of shrunk our pool, and there weren't as many women available for those slots, and I think that is why that dynamic changed with that movement. Being the only woman in Republican leadership in the legislature has been interesting. The first couple of meetings, there was everyone was very careful and concerned, and now there's none of that. And I was never treated any differently. It was just, we didn't all know each other, and so it took some time for everyone to get comfortable and after a week or two, it's fine, it's perfectly comfortable, and I don't feel like the odd man out by any means.
I wanted to ask you about some of the contentious issues in the legislature that it seems like within the House Republican caucus especially, there are splits. I'm sure this is a big surprise to you.
I am so glad you told me.
You're right. So, Medicaid expansion really stands out. You are on the House Health and Welfare Committee, and earlier this week we heard Speaker Bedke say that he didn't have the votes to have just clean Medicaid funding without any sideboards. He didn't have the votes for sideboards that had been proposed, and he didn't have the votes for a repeal. Can you walk me through that math? Because Matt Erpelding, the minority leader, says that they have bipartisan votes for a Montana-style work requirement or optional work requirement plan.
Okay, well, I'll be honest, I have yet to see a draft from Representative Erpelding at all. He's not offered a draft. I do sit on Health and Welfare. There's been no draft circulated that I'm aware of on Health and Welfare. And I think that, honestly, the proposal put forward by Representative Vanderwater was to test the waters, because there was nothing going forward. There was the bill that was introduced by Senator Souza but that was not, it didn't quite go as far as a lot of our House members were looking for. And I think that what we're trying to do to address Proposition 2 is we understand the will of the people, we understand what they're looking for in covering the gap population, and we're trying to address that while still staying true to our roots of fiscal responsibility. We're trying to, since we have this opportunity, make sure we address population health. And in doing so, it takes more than just a funding mechanism, which wasn't provided by Proposition 2. And I think that's the frustration from a lot of our members, in that, okay, we're having to try to find a place to fund this, and so the standard was lower on the proposition than it is in the legislature. So in the legislature, you have to provide a fiscal statement on how things are going to get funded, and we weren't given that. We were given a demand without a way to pay for it. So that's what we're trying to put something together that is the best of all worlds, and sometimes that takes time.
Now, you sat through testimony last week on Representative Van der Woude's first proposal, that first go. And overwhelmingly, people said that they did not want sideboards, that they did not want work requirements or any sort of mechanism that would repeal Medicaid if the funding formula or the funding split from the feds changed. How much of that testimony changes the conversation within your caucus? Does it make any difference?
Well, I think we're all happy to listen to people when they come in, okay? I think people need to understand that, and so it's not that we are ignoring anybody by any means, but there was a lot of testimony where people were complaining about a situation that didn't exist. So under that bill, there were quite a few exemptions, and we heard people with several that were concerned about folks with disabilities, which was actually an exemption from a work requirement. Kids that are in college, that's an exemption from the work requirement. So I think having complete knowledge of the bill and getting that message out so people really understand what they're talking about, rather than this, the two words work requirement eliminating everyone, I think we need to work better on letting people know.
Do you see a situation like what happened in 2013 with the insurance exchange? It required Democratic votes to get it out of the House. The majority of House Republicans did not vote for it. Might that happen with a Medicaid bill this year?
I know that, and my situation, and a lot of people don't understand what the caucus chairman does. So my primary consideration is always my Republican caucus, and it's not necessarily my job to reach too far out beyond that, because that's my job. My job is the 56 members of the Idaho House Republican caucus. And so we're really working on a solution that as many of our members can get behind as we can pull together. And so that's been our solution. Now contrast that with the Speaker, who the Speaker is the Speaker of the House. He's not just a Republican, he's the Speaker of the House. And so everybody has a little different set of priorities, and quite honestly, mine is to get as many members on board, and hopefully we can get the Democrats on board. If everybody can get on board, that's great, but my primary focus will always be my members.
For somebody sitting at home, that might sound a little bit cynical, right? Instead of working for a solution that might make more people happy, working for a solution that makes one party happy.
Well, and that's true, but when you're looking at more people happy, you're looking at 56 out of the 70 members of the House of Representatives. And so you are looking at a supermajority. And if you can at all, if we put the supermajority together, then we can make a plan work. And with that, you have to look at, in our caucus, it is a really wide array when it comes to membership. So, we had talked earlier about my house is a zip code and a freeway exit, not an urban area. So urban renewal isn't really my thing. Whereas you get other members who, live in the city of Nampa or Caldwell. And so we have a big diversity in caucus, even though we all subscribe to the same Republican philosophy. So,
I've heard a few people say that sometimes it's easier to find common ground with people from the opposite party than it is sometimes within members of your own caucus. Is there any truth to that on some of these issues?
I think absolutely on some of those issues, and I think we saw some of that today in some of the debate, but because everybody brings a different perspective, and there are some issues where I'll be more closely aligned sometimes with a member of the other party, but I think in the end my goal is always to get my members together and to put together a Republican solution, and part of it is I believe the Republican solution is the right solution, and so that otherwise why would I be here?
I'm curious too about one of the other major issues this year, the funding formula. On Monday we saw House Republicans vote against introducing Chairman Clow's funding formula bill in the House Education Committee, and a number of Republicans also voted against Sherry Ibarra's bill, voted to hold that in committee. Can you talk a little bit about that split? Because you don't often see members of a committee vote against even printing a chairman's bill.
Yeah, that is an unusual situation. We did see that last year, I believe, in state affairs. That happened once or twice, and it's always unfortunate. And you try to negotiate your way out of that. That's not ever anything you want to do. And just because it's uncomfortable for everyone, usually there's a solution. You can redraft, you can make changes, but unfortunately at some points, people just feel passionately enough about an issue that they feel like they want to go forward, and the consequences are what they are, and obviously Chairman Clow felt really strongly about his proposal, and some members of the committee felt equally as strongly in the other direction. So you try to work that out as best you can, and I think they're trying to work that out now, and I know that there's the Senate also has a formula, and everybody's trying to get on board. I think part of the problem that we've had with the funding formula is it's difficult to get everybody in the room at the same time for just an open discussion because of all of the requirements to do that, and so everybody wants to be involved, everybody feels like they want to be heard, and it's just a short session, and it's not a lot of time, so I think that played into it as well.
There was also Superintendent Ibarra's bill, and I'm curious, within your caucus, who's the leader when it comes to education issues? Because it seems like there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
I think that's probably accurate, and we have a lot of really well-qualified people when it comes to the Ed Committee. We have former superintendents, school board members, we have charter school folks. It's again a diverse group of people, and teachers, professors, and because they have some substantial background, their knowledge is valuable, and we need to try to find ways to include them as best we can. And I think that's where some of those votes come from, is that when you have that kind of a broad base of knowledge, it shows.
You have the broad base of knowledge, but is there a leadership vacuum in education issues?
I don't know that there's a vacuum. I think they're just finding their way.
It's a very nice way to put it. Walk me through how we get to sine die. What are the issues that you absolutely have to address besides setting the budget?
Well, yeah, of course, setting the budget. We have a constitutional responsibility to set the budget. We have essentially two responsibilities: set the budget and review the rules. And I think that really what we're trying to discuss and work our way through is the Prop 2, and finding a way to make sure that that's sustainable and working for what the governor wants of an Idaho solution, and trying to work that out with the Senate and the governor and with my members, and trying to walk through that. And I'm hopeful that sooner rather than later we put something together. I really am, and I think it's completely doable.
Is there any possibility that the legislature just doesn't fund expansion?
I cannot see that path forward, but I don't have my magic 8-ball with me, so in all seriousness, I don't see that as a real path forward.
On the other side of the spectrum, is there any chance that you fund it without work requirements?
Without work requirements at all, or different versions of work requirements? I think that there is a big push for work requirements in some form. Now, be that, mandatory with exceptions, be that voluntary, which doesn't really promote the work requirement. How that looks, I'm not sure. I think that regardless of your party in the state of Idaho, you're a big believer in personal responsibility and getting out of the situation that you're in. And that's what that work requirement provides, is it provides people training. It allows for volunteering in your community. It's not that when you say work requirement, it sounds terribly onerous, but it allows for kids to be in school, college kids. And so what we're really trying with that is to get people out of that poverty level and bring them up. And so it's not a means of clearing people out. It's a means of lifting people up.
Is there a possibility that we go home without redoing the funding formula?
I think there might be a possibility of that. And I would also caution too, a lot of people are concerned that the funding formula would be implemented immediately. And I think that if the discussions that I've had with the folks on the interim committee, I think the intention was to kind of just follow along, but to have that formula follow the current funding formula, kind of ghost it to see what works and what doesn't before we implemented any formula, because in the end, we're not trying to hurt any district. Again, it's, lift all the boats. So I think that something will be done, but to actual full implementation of the funding formula, I don't know that will happen this year.
What's your target date that you think the legislature will sine die?
The actual date that we've been told is, of course, the 25th. I have my doubts.
Are you saying 25th of March or 25th of April?
25th of March. 25th of March is the target. I don't know that we'll make that target. I know that there has been a very concerted effort to do that because, of course, every day we're here, it costs taxpayer dollars. And we're really cognizant of the thousands of dollars it costs for us to be in session. Additionally, a lot of us have real jobs. Like, for example, we farm. And of course, as we get into April, that has consequences. So, and there's a lot of folks, ranchers, farmers, and even those who have, realty businesses or bankers. We all need to get back to work. And so I think there is a real push to wrap this up by the end of March, for sure.
On the flip side, if you push too much to wrap it up, do you risk doing subpar legislation just for the sake of getting home?
I think that we're avoiding that based upon, I think that if we look at the primary issue, I believe right now is Prop 2, right? And how we can best make that work. And I think that that's the reason for throwing drafts out, is because we don't want to do that. That the whole idea isn't to just, push something through as quick as possible, go home, and then have regrets that you did it. So I think there is a concerted effort, but you don't have to go fast, but you can be efficient.
One last question. How are negotiations with the Senate going, and are we going to see hostages soon?
I don't know that there are hostages. Like I say, we have a pretty collegial, as far as the leadership meetings go, very collegial relationship with the Senate. But really, we're focused on the big issues right now. So I don't know that I can identify any for you, but. Again, if you look at leadership in the House, I am 4 of 4. I didn't take the top spot, so.
Yet, right?
Yeah. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.